Welcome to You Can Talk to Me, a Beatles podcast. It's time to make our way across the universe and talk all things John, Paul, George and Ringo.
Andru, thank you for joining me here on the You Can Talk to Me Beatles podcast. Looking forward to digging into this really unusual chapter in the story of the Beatles with you.
Good to be with you, Mike.
This is all around this incredible conspiracy that happens during the latter years of the Beatles story. And I guess we'll talk in such a way where we cover that for people that know it deep and some that might be coming to the story fairly new. The book is Turn Me On Dead Man, The Beatles and the Paul is Dead hoax. So very keen to jump into that. But before we go there, could you tell us when you first became aware of the Beatles and what that meant to you?
Well, it's really interesting that I'm just old enough that I've existed the entire time the Beatles were a recording group. I was born in 1962, so I'm a little young to be a first-time Beatles fan. I vaguely remember hearing the songs. My parents weren't really into rock music, so it didn't get played around the house that much. So it was basically about I'd say the very early 70s. I had a friend of mine, and I had heard a song on the radio by a group called Crack the Sky. I don't know if you're familiar with them. They were a local band in the Washington, D.C. area, and they did their own version of I Am the Walrus. And I thought it was such a cool song. I said, wow, this is a really cool song. And I told my friend about it. And he goes, that's a Beatles song. And I go, the Beatles? And I had kind of heard about the Beatles, but I didn't really know that much about them. And he says, here, I'm going to loan you a record. And he loaned me Abbey Road. And that was the first one I heard. And then I was hooked from that moment on. And I delved into it, and I read every book there was on the subject. I got every record. I started, even back then, I realized I was a collector, and I wanted to hear the B-sides and the live recordings and the bootlegs and all that. So by the time I did a lot of catching up, I mean, that was my introduction is probably around the age of 12. And by the time I was 16, I was an expert.
Yeah, I hear you.
I thought myself as an expert.
Yeah, very similar kind of thing for me in terms of that age bracket. That's a great gateway to come in on too with Abbey Road. It's a high-end gateway in.
Absolutely. It was probably, I wouldn't say it's my favorite album by them, or even their best, but it's their best sounding album. To this day, it still sounds like a modern recording because it was their first digital recording. It was the first time that they had, digital audio, like instead of using tube amps and everything was solid state. So they had a fantastic sound on that album that still stands up to this day.
It's almost like as they were checking out, they were signaling the 70s sound coming in because it sounds very much like a 70s album in its own way too.
Right. And it was right at the tail end, right there in 1969, which coincidentally is right when the Paul is Dead hoax or rumor took off.
That might just be the best segue that we've ever had in this podcast series. So can we maybe jump over into that? When did writing first come into your life? Because that's a very specific thing to be doing too.
Oh, probably right around the same time that I grew fond of the Beatles. I was growing fond of books, and I was a voracious reader, and I thought I'd like to write my own stories, and I tried. I didn't realize what kind of work was that entailed. So a lot of times when you're a kid, your attention span is very short because you want to go out and play with your friends and everything. So I didn't have that kind of dedication back then. So that kind of got put off to the side. But I always had a talent for it. I always thought I was a good writer. And I don't know, you be the judge of that if you read my book. But I do believe in fact, when I went to stay with my dad during COVID, I didn't have much to do while I was with him, and he was like in a very remote location. So I kind of reinstituted my writing life as far as writing fiction. So even though I've written this nonfiction book about the Beatles, I've also written two novels, which I wrote during COVID. And those are also going to come out, by the way. Um, they're going to be published by Genius Books. They're a small publisher in Wisconsin in the United States. And I'm looking forward to that. They're my first fictional works coming out. And yeah, I mean, I love writing. I still do to this day. And I'm writing right now. I'm currently working on my third novel.
Well, it's been quite prolific then over the years.
Well, just lately, yes.
Yeah,
Since COVID, as I said, I've written probably five books. Only three of them I think are worth putting out.
it's wonderful. What is it about this particular story that captivated you to realize that there's a book here to dig in and have a take on one of the great rock and roll conspiracies?
Oh, absolutely. It was the same thing I talked about earlier about reading up on the Beatles, reading everything I could get my hands on. And one of the books I got was The Beatles Forever. It's a large format, almost like what you would call a coffee table book. It was full of photographs, and it was chock full of information. And there was maybe a page and a half about the Paul is dead rumor. That's it. And I said, I want to know more about this. Who's this Russ Gibb? Who's this
Yeah.
Fred Labor? Who's this? Who's that? All these people that Nicholas Schaffner mentioned. And so I picked up other books and skimmed through them, looking for something about Paul McCartney being dead. And what is this all about? And I found out that there was probably no one who thought that it warranted a book until me. And I said, there's enough interest in this, and I think there's enough information that I could gather that I could put this out in the form of a book. So right then, the germ of the idea was there, and I kept hoping somebody would write the book. I was thinking I would love to do it, but I'm sure somebody will. It's such a great idea. Somebody's going to do it. And that was probably back, but Schaffner's book came out in 77, I think.
Yeah.
So I thought from that moment on, I kept thinking that somebody's going to write this book. Somebody's going to write this book. Nobody wrote the book.
Hmm.
So in 1988, I decided I'm going to write this book. And so I started, and this is before the internet. So I had to do a lot of shoe leather investigations. I had to get on the phone. I lived in Washington, D.C. at the time. So I went to the Library of Congress and went through all their newspapers and old phone books even to see if I could find phone numbers of people that I could call and contact. And so I could start gathering this information. And so I decided, you know what? I'm going to be a journalist. I'm going to like contact people. I'm going to interview them. I don't know what the heck I'm doing, but I'm going to do it anyway.
Hmm.
So I just started calling people, hoping that they would put me in contact with other people. And so eventually I found Russ Gibb. I found Fred Labor. Um, I found out way more information when I was finding these old newspapers, going through the microfilm in the Library of Congress. I started making copies of all the newspapers. I had like a stack this high of copies of Xeroxes. And I got a file cabinet and started putting them in the file cabinet. And I got real serious about it. And it took me 3 years to actually put something together. And I put out my first edition of the book. It was put out by Popular Culture Inc., which was a pretty small publisher in Michigan. And they put the book out in 1994. That was the first edition of the
Hmm.
book. But I wasn't quite, not totally happy with it. I thought there was more that I could gather. And that's right about when the internet started coming out. So I started doing more research. So I put out a second volume, or a second edition, I should say, of the book. Kind of tore it all apart and put it right back together again. Rewrote it from the beginning to the end.
Wow.
That one came out in 2004. And then I decided I'm 63 years old now, and I'm really tired of doing this because I've devoted my life to this since 1988. And but I'm going to do one last edition of the book, and that's the final edition, and that's this.
Mm-hmm.
This
Good
is the
stuff.
third edition of Turn Me On Dead Man, and it's the last time I'm going to do anything with this.
Are you satisfied
But I
now?
think it's
It's
I'm
definitive?
satisfied, and it's the
Yeah.
definitive version of the book. And so I hope people will pick this up and read it, and I hope they will find it enlightening and entertaining and fun,
Yeah.
because it should be fun. This is what it's all about. The Beatles are about fun. It's
Yes.
about entertainment and enjoyment. And I think we should keep that in mind when we talk about this. It's not nothing macabre
Mm.
or dreary. It's just a goof.
Yes. And I think you said some names there, like was it Russ Gibbs? It
Yes.
goes on. Tom Harper was a name I came across just recently as well. There's a whole bunch of these names, and there's a lot of lore here. I wouldn't mind just unpacking. And for those that don't know, most people listening will, but even down to the book title, Turn Me On Dead Man, it might be nice to do a little bit of a snapshot of that story before we dive in a little deeper. Would you mind taking us through some of that history 101 just to get us established before we dig into the weeds a little bit?
Well, there were antecedents of this rumor. I mean, I can get into that later if you want, but the main event, the ground zero of the Paul is dead rumor, really took place. I can give you the exact date, October 12th, 1969. It was a Sunday. How about that?
Not bad.
That's the ground zero of what people consider the initial event. Now, there were other events that we can talk about later, and I go in very great depth in the book about that. But the one people consider to be basically the beginning of the Paul is dead rumor is that date. And that was when Russ Gibb, who was a DJ in Detroit, Michigan, he was doing his Sunday morning show. And what he did during his shows is he would play records and then he would take phone calls from people calling in and, just, rapping as he called it. That was, rapping, not rapping like what we think about now, but let's rap about things, like hippie talk.
Yeah.
And so what happened was he took one phone call and this guy is on the phone. He's a kid. He goes, "Hi, Russ, it's Tom on the line. And I was wondering, Paul, this whole Paul is dead thing, what is this all about?" And he goes, "Wait a second." Russ Gibbs says, "Wait a second. What are you talking about?" He says, "Paul McCartney is dead. And what is this all about?" And he says, "Okay, so first of all, where do you go to school?" And he goes, I go to school at Eastern Michigan University. And you heard that Paul McCartney is dead. So then Tom tells him the whole story and says that he heard that if you play this record backwards, if you take the White Album and you put the White Album on a turntable and you go to the track called Revolution 9 and you get to the point where the gentleman is intoning number 9, number 9, number 9, and then you turn off the motor and you spin the record with your hand backwards, you'll hear a voice. And it says, "Turn me on, dead man. Turn me on, dead man." And Russ Gibb went, "Oh man, that's mind blowing. Hold on a second." And so he did it live on the air. He took the record and he found the cut and he played it backwards. And sure enough, it said, "Turn me on, dead man." And he was blown away. And Tom continued and said, "There's a lot more clues." And he started going into the other clues, some of the big ones, like Strawberry Fields Forever. At the end, it fades out and it comes back, and a voice comes on. It's John Lennon's saying, "I buried Paul." And so Russ Gibb played that live on the air. This is all going live on the
Yeah.
air on a radio show on a Sunday morning. in Detroit, Michigan. And suddenly other people are calling in. Other people call on the phone and they offer their own clues. Oh, yeah, we've been talking about this for a couple weeks now on our university campus. This was a lot of university kids that were discovering this and discussing it on their campuses. And then they wanted to share it with somebody. And all of a sudden they had a chance to share it with Russ Gibb, who was Uncle Russ.
Yeah.
He was the jovial talk show record DJ that everybody loved. So they called him their uncle, Uncle Russ. And they called Uncle Russ and they told them the clues that they found. And they also heard that Paul was dead. And this is all these universities around the Detroit area. And then Russ kept talking about it for about 2 hours. And then his radio show was over. But the rumor just continued from there. And he talked about it the next night, or the next day, rather. And other DJs picked up on it. And they started talking about it. And then there was this one kid who was driving around listening to Russ Gibb's radio show, that Sunday show. And his name was Fred Labor. And he was at the University of Michigan, and he worked for the newspaper there. And he was assigned to review the album Abbey Road, which had just come out. So he suddenly had an idea of how to review the record. So 2 days later, on October 14th, his record review came out in the University of Michigan daily newspaper. And in that newspaper, he created this whole legend that he just cooked up in his head about Paul McCartney dying in a car crash in 1966 and being replaced by a double. And then the Beatles decided that they had to tell their fans by leaking out clues to his death, one by one, secret clues, audio clues, visual clues on the album covers. And it would reveal the fact that Paul was dead. And Fred Labor told this whole tale in this record review of Abbey Road. He didn't even talk about the songs on Abbey Road. Yeah. All he talked about was Paul being dead. And he talked about, he did talk about Abbey Road. He talked about the cover of Abbey Road. He talked about Paul being barefoot. And that's how they bury corpses in Italy. And they talked about Paul being right-handed in the photograph on the cover. He's holding a cigarette in his right hand. But everybody knows Paul's left-handed. So why is this guy on the cover, who's Paul McCartney supposedly, holding a cigarette in his right hand? Because he's an imposter. He's a double. He's the replacement. Yeah. Who Fred Labor decided his name was William Campbell. Some people know him as Billy Shears, of course.
Yes, yeah.
But Fred Labor dubbed him William Campbell. So that became part of this legend, this lore, this whole Baroque story about Paul. And it's just fascinating. If you want to read it, it's in the book. I reproduced the newspaper article, every word of it, and it's fascinating.
There's a lot to be said about that Abbey Road piece, for example. And if we dig into the clues for just a moment, for me, when I go back to being second generation fan, I would have been about 10, and I heard an AM radio special on Paul is Dead. I had no idea what Paul is Dead was about, and it scared the hell out of me. And they lent into that. You know, it had the downbeat music and the droney kind of soundtrack and this very ominous voice telling you the story. And as a kid, sitting in a bedroom, what is all this? And then we all sat around a few days later and discovered you could turn the turntable backwards and hear "Turn Me On, Dead Man." And then it was pointed out, if you look to the bottom right corner of the White Album poster, you'll see Paul with skeletal hands reaching out to him. I'm thinking, that can't be. And then, of course, you go and look and go, well, what is that? You know, and then it leans into some of the ridiculous Abbey Road with the license plate and the 28 if, but with the LWP. And what did I see? There was Linda McCartney weeps. 28 if, still alive. But, of course, he would have been 27, as we know.
Right.
There seems to be this incredible thing that's happening at this point in the 60s where it's maybe hard for people to appreciate it now, but the Beatles are so entrenched into the zeitgeist, into the culture, This kind of speaks to that, doesn't it? And perhaps also this tumultuous time in American history as well, particularly for the youth culture. Do you find connective tissue there about the times in which this story is born within the country?
Oh, absolutely. And that's the thing. I don't want people to think my book is just a list of clues or, just a regurgitation of the rumor, because I do look into that. This is a very serious investigation that I did. There's a couple other books about the Paul is dead hoax. And I think I was more serious about it. And that's the kind of thing I looked into, was how the culture figured into it, how religion or the lack of religion figured into it, the spiritual deprivation that a lot of kids felt at the time, the fear of going to the Vietnam War and getting killed. The draft was still active in America at the time, and you could be drafted if you weren't married or in college. You were draft age. You're going to Vietnam. So the reality of death was very real, but there was sort of this religious aspect that our if Paul McCartney can survive death,
Hmm.
and be resurrected, as a double or whatever, symbolically resurrected, then we have nothing to fear about death, because if he can get through it, then we can get through it.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of aspects like that I look into, as the spiritual aspects. Um, the fact that religion had kind of been on the wane a little bit. People were questioning religion, and the Beatles were kind of creating this religion to the cluesters, the people that believe the clues and everything. I call them cluesters.
Yeah.
Um, and what happened was it became almost a religion in itself. People saw it as yeah, for instance, on Abbey Road, you could say that tableau on the front of the four of them walking across the Abbey Road, that there are like religious kind of tone to all each individual. There's John Lennon, who's dressed in white like a preacher. There's Paul, who's dressed like a corpse. There's George, I believe, or Ringo, dressed like a gravedigger.
Yeah.
So there's that kind of symbolism. At least that's what the kids found.
Yeah.
A lot of the kids found that.
I always found that there's some of the, again, it speaks to this idea that you can almost lead a collective thinking through groups once you start to suggest that this piece of information might be true. Go look for this. And then suddenly we're all collectively looking at the same thing with the same desire to have the same outcome. And that's,
Right.
you see that, I guess, even at a social level. Like, it can happen very easily. I guess at this time
Right.
too, we're pre-digital. It's hard to source your own line of information and maybe seek out a truth. You kind of take what's coming to you via mainstream media. It kind of speaks to that, doesn't it? You start to look for things and find a rational thinking in it. Do you see that also, that this was a thing of the times, that if I suggest to you an idea is true, you might begin to look for that very thing?
Of course, it's the power of suggestion. If I tell you something is there, you're more apt to hear that. For instance, most of the clues. I mean, some of the clues are real in your face, and other ones are kind of dicey. But if I say, "Do you hear this? Do you hear him saying, Paul is a dead man. Miss him, miss him, miss him," which is one of the clues. Maybe you won't hear that, but if I tell you, "Do you hear that?" You'll say, "Oh yeah, I hear that."
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with pointing out things, you know, pointing out the fact that Paul McCartney, for instance, is always singled out. Whether he's dead or not is not really the point. You can't argue with the fact that Paul is individually singled out on lots of album covers and lots of photographs. For instance, in the Magical Mystery Tour booklet, there's a picture of the four Beatles coming down a staircase in tuxedos, and they're wearing carnations in their lapels. Three of the Beatles have red carnations, but only one Beatle has a black carnation. Can you guess which one?
Yeah.
And see, there's a lot of things like that where Paul is individually sort of put off to the side or pointed out to
Yeah.
in different ways.
That speaks to the idea of his back turned on the backside of the Sergeant Pepper album too, right? And then
Right.
you hear
Why was that?
yes,
Why did
absolutely.
they do that?
Yeah.
And that's what the kids did. The college kids sat around in their dorms and they took out the record album covers because there was no computers back then
Yeah.
and TV was kind of boring. So, it'd be a lot more fun to sit around the dorm and smoking a joint and drinking a beer
Yeah.
and pulling out the record albums and saying, well, what can we see on this album?
Yeah.
In the album covers, I mean, they were much bigger than CD covers.
Yeah.
There's a lot of information on there. And so the kids were looking on there and they were seeing, especially the booklet. Wow. And
Yeah.
Magical History Tour, 24-page booklet, picture after picture.
Yeah.
And Paul, in a lot of them, there's pictures that you probably wouldn't think are clues, but I could tell you they're clues because I'm saying they're clues. But,
Yeah, there we go.
for instance, look, there's one photo of a table where all these people are dining, and it's like two tables, and it looks like a crucifix
Huh.
because I say it looks like a crucifix.
Yeah,
And that's what
yeah.
the kids did. The kids went around and said, "Look, it's a crucifix."
But then you get the ones in that booklet, if we stay in that for a moment, that are really odd, if you start to build this story. Paul sitting there in the army uniform with the I was
Hmm.
banner on the desk table. I remember reading about that, thinking, yeah, well, what does that even mean? If that's there, that's got to be something. I think there's a blood red shoes piece in there as well that
In
was
front of a
brought
drum,
up.
in front of Ringo's drums, it says "Love the Three Beatles" on the drum head, and then there's two bloody shoes sitting right at the base of
Yeah.
the bass drum.
But as you say, once you start to have this power of suggestion and people start to lead you in, it's very easy to get lost in it. There's a fun element to this too, isn't there? There's an innocence to it, as much as there's a little bit of a darkness in the reflection of the times. There's a sense of escape and fun, which is also what the Beatles were ultimately all about. And they're playing with it as well, aren't they? Having this communication back to their audience.
Right. And they did have fun with it. I mean, I don't know if they had fun with the rumor specifically, but they had fun with people trying to find clues because John Lennon says it directly in one of the songs. In Glass Onion, he says, well, here's another clue for you all. The walrus was Paul. What does that mean? Well, the walrus is a symbol of death.
Yeah.
That's what the Klooster said. It's like the Welsh sign of death or the Eskimo sign of death or something like that,
Yeah.
which is nonsense, but that's what they said. Incidentally, I have a appendix in the book, and it has 170 clues that the kids found back then in 1969. 170. And most of the clues, I make a comment after. So I present the clue like, oh, wow, listen to this. And it sounds really like phenomenal. And then I have my comment, and I'm like the, Dr. Buzzkill. I say, yeah, well, that's not really, that's not really what walrus means. Walrus, is whale horse. It's a Norse, term that means whale horse. That's all it means. It doesn't mean dead, and there's no Greek term for it or anything like that. Walrus is not Greek for corpse.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
was one of the clues.
If you had to call it, just to give us a sense of your own top three clues, what are the ones that really strike you as the most fun, the most intriguing?
I'll tell you one that to this day I still can't believe. I don't know what the heck I'm hearing. If you listen to the Sergeant Pepper reprise that goes into A Day in the Life, where they play the Sergeant Pepper kind of sped up as a kind of a rockin' little quick 50-second like reprise, basically. Um, you right when they're singing the last chorus and they're holding those long notes, Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, you hear Paul McCartney in the background shouting, and he says, "Paul McCartney is dead, everybody, really, really dead."
You can hear that? Are you saying you hear that?
You can hear it clear, and you can really hear it now on the new when they remastered the recordings in 2009, I think. 2009, they remastered all the CDs, and you can hear it clear as a bell. You put it on right now. You can hear it.
You'll send me back to that because I've never come across that one before.
Paul McCartney's dead, everybody. Really, really dead. Yeah.
Really? Okay.
You'll hear it. It's clear as a bell. It's not even really buried in. It used to be more buried in the music because it wasn't mixed or it wasn't mastered very well.
Right.
But they remastered everything, and it's clear as a bell right now.
So is this officially you discovering a new clue here?
Um,
Or is that one that you knew? Has that been called out?
Somebody else mentioned it to me a
Yeah,
long time ago.
I've never
But
heard it.
they said you could only hear it on the mono version
Right.
of Sergeant Pepper. So but now you can hear it on the stereo perfectly well.
Huh.
And power of suggestion, I'm telling you, you're going to hear it.
Well,
And I swear you hear it, and you'll never not hear it after I just told you that.
I'm
And I,
convinced now before I even play it. You've got complete mastery over me.
and the thing it's the one thing that it still gives me chills. I swear to God, it does. When
Yeah.
I hear it, why are they saying that? Why am I hearing this? And I'm trying to tell myself that it's not there, but it sounds like it's there. So that's my favorite clue of all the Paul is Dead clues. And of course, Turn Me On Dead Man. That's the gold standard.
Yeah.
Revolution 9 played backgrounds, number nine, Turn Me On Dead Man. So you wanted three, right?
Yeah.
Probably, I guess I'm so tired. Right at the end of I'm so tired, there's this mumbling. John Lennon mumbles. And supposedly what he says is, Mr. Mister, how about another one? You really can't tell what he's saying. It's just kind
No.
of, Mr. Mister, how about another
Yeah.
one?
Yeah.
But if you play that backwards, it goes, Ball is a dead man. Miss him, miss him, miss him.
Yeah. You even had the right pitch on that being played
Right, that's
backwards
what I was
there.
trying to do.
I can hear it. It's impressive. I heard one the other day that I thought was completely bananas, and that was someone had made the link that in the final scenes of The Ruttles, where Eric Idle is being run over by a vehicle off Abbey Road on the crossing, that's the Ruttles also dropping a clue to Paul being killed in a car accident, and the clues can be found in greater detail on the Abbey Road album cover. I remember reading that thinking, oh, come on, you found a clue in the Ruttles? But that
I
does,
think didn't they say Stig is dead in the
yeah, well,
Ruttles?
that's correct. They do get that in there too. Yeah, genius. When you went through that process of research with that love of the band and that part of the story that you had, what did it do for you with your ongoing passion for them? Because even when you take the music out of it, it's just a great story, isn't it? It's so rich. What did it do for you just as a fan going through the process of offering something back into the world of Beatles authorship?
Well, that's kind of the thing I'm not making any money off of this. I mean, this is a passion project for me. It's a labor of love, as they say. You know, I've not sold millions of copies of this book, even the first edition, which was very popular when it came out. Um, you know, I haven't made that much money from it. The main thing I wanted to do was contribute to the whole wealth of Beatles knowledge and history, because I think it's a part of the history that had never been told in depth before. I mean, there's all kinds of great books about the Beatles, and they're very, they look at different aspects of the songwriting, or you know, May Pang did one about her affair with John Lennon, loving John. There's all kinds of little slices of Beatles history that's been told in numerous books. I mean, literally thousands of Beatles books. And but there was never until I wrote the first edition, there was never a Beatles Turn Me On Dead Man that looked into the Paul is Dead rumor. Now there's a couple more besides mine, but I still don't think no one's eclipsed what I've done because I put a lot of work into it. I
Yeah.
don't say it brag. I say it because I that was my life
Mm,
from 1988 to 1992, 93. That's all I did. I didn't
yeah,
have a girlfriend. I didn't have kids. I didn't have marriage. I had a job, but pretty much I did my job and then came home and on my days off, every spare hour I worked on this.
yeah. That
Poured my heart and soul into it, and then I when I did the revamped volumes of it, the revamped editions, I should say. Um, Again, I poured my heart into it. I didn't put as much time into it because I'd already done the skeleton of the work already, and most of the footwork had been done already. Most of the interviews in this book still date back to the 80s and early 90s. I haven't done a lot of fresh interviews. A few, but a lot of the basic interviews are from that time period.
What's your favorite
What I
interview
did.
and your favorite interviewee through that process that, for
Oh,
whatever
Russ
reason?
Gibb by far.
Yeah.
I interviewed Russ Gibb several times in the 80s, and he's a fascinating guy. He's just a great storyteller. The problem with Russ Gibb was that he would go off on tangents and he'd tell these other stories. I'm trying to get him to answer the question, and he's like telling these stories. He's going off on this and off on that. But it was great because he was like a he had it was had a wealth of information.
Yeah.
He was a really interesting guy. In Detroit, besides being a DJ, he was a teacher. That was his main job. He taught. But he also, when cable TV was starting to come out, he bought a bunch of franchises. So he got wealthy off of it. So he was very wealthy, but it was from him having the foresight to invest in cable TV.
Huh.
Then he thought of himself as an impresario, and he opened up a bunch of rock clubs in Detroit. He opened up a famous club called Grande Ballroom, or Grandy Ballroom, some people pronounce it. It's very famous. If you look at old psychedelic posters, the ones with all the colors and
Yeah.
everything, advertising, Grateful Dead or
Yes.
Led
Jefferson
Zeppelin.
Airplane and
Yeah.
yeah.
When they would come to the Grandy Ballroom, he was there, and he basically booked them into that club, the Grandy Ballroom. And there's a lot of famous recordings from that. MC5,
Yeah.
early Bob Seger, before Bob Seger became a pop star. He was a Detroit legend
Yeah.
doing this kind of garage rock. Um, but he would tell those stories about the Grandy Ballroom,
Yeah.
and later he worked with a band called Sky. Um, they put out a couple records on RCA, but they didn't really become famous. But then the guy that was the leader of Sky went on to become the leader of another band called The Knack,
Huh.
if you know that band,
Of
My
course.
Sharona.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he worked with Doug Feiger, I guess his name was.
Yeah. He sounds like he would have been a great raconteur, just taking the scenic route to get to the answer to your question, probably.
It was incredible. I mean, I
Yeah.
love talking to him. And there's so much information that he gave me. He
Yeah.
he gave me information that I used to get more information.
Yeah.
Like, have you talked to this person? Have you talked to this person? So it was great, and he was very gracious with his time. Anytime I called him, he'd chat with me on the phone. I flew out to Detroit and hung out with him for a couple days.
Yeah, that's wonderful. With the time you spent in this research, as you say, you were just single-eyed focused on making sure you delivered something here that was rich and had value. And the deeper you got in, was there ever at any time a little part of you that went, hey, wait a minute? As you got more forensic, was there ever a little part of your mind that went, well, hang on, what's that? Or was it always a part of you going, yeah, this is fun? Or was there ever a little point of darkness amidst all of that?
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
I'll tell you what happened. I was in Washington, D.C., and it was just before I moved to California, and I was living in this smelly little apartment. It's like a little no bedroom apartment. It was like a studio.
Yeah.
Um, and I wouldn't say I lost my job, but it didn't look too good like I was going to be able to keep my job. So I was kind of getting geared up to like reinvent myself. And I said, well, am I going to throw my lot in completely with writing? Am I going to maybe try to get a job at a newspaper or something? I didn't know what I was going to do. So I basically, sold all my stuff. So I had like a very minimal existence in this little smelly apartment.
Yeah.
And, uh, and I'm kind of polishing my book and sending it off to publishers unsolicited. I didn't have an agent or anything. And one night it was really dark, and I ordered a pizza and had a six pack of beer, and I'm sitting in this dark apartment, and I'm saying I'm going to listen to some of these records again because I'm going to look for more clues. And I put on "I Am a Walrus," and I played it. And I was so spooked because it just hit me that this was the story of Paul McCartney dying in a car crash. It like told to me when I listened to it, the state of mind I was in that
Yeah.
night.
Yeah.
It sounded like that John Lennon was confessing to knowing that Paul had died in this car crash. And then the ambulance came, waiting for the van to come. That's the ambulance thing.
Yeah.
I started hearing every clue that the Klusters had talked about in my research, and I started saying, wait a second, is this real? Maybe he really did die. It was just that one moment, and it was chilling. I just felt a chill go through my body. Now I know in the cold morning light, I came to my senses.
The cold morning light. I love it.
But that night, I really got spooked. That was the one time I really got spooked.
There's footage, of course, of Tittenhurst Park when John's recording the Imagine album, and the name escapes me, but they meet the guy that's been camped out in the garden. He's been sleeping out around the property, and he's clearly got some issues. And John comes out to speak with him, and he says he just wants to talk to him, and he's asking him about lyrics. He's quoting lyrics to John, and John's saying, these are just words. They're just words that I put together, and the guy says, and you've probably seen this footage, I just figured if I met you, it would all make sense. And he's like, well, anything makes sense if you're flying, or whatever the line is that he has to him. That it all makes sense, but I'm just throwing words out there. But if that's got relevance to your life, then that's good. And it's almost like this little microcosm of the relationship they had with the entire world in terms of the youth tuned into them. If you find meaning, then meaning is what you found, and that's great. But don't look beyond that.
That's the thing, though, is it can be for good or for bad.
Yeah.
If you find meaning, like I love the line in the end, and in the end, the love you make or the love you take is equal to the love you make. That's just like that. He encompasses the Beatles right there. That one line.
Yes.
That's what I take away from the Beatles. But then you get like Charles Manson. What did he take away from the Beatles?
There you go.
So it can be dangerous. It goes both ways. And that's the thing about the whole Paul is dead thing is yeah, have fun with it. It's fun. I think the clues are fun. And a lot of the newspapers at the time, when the mainstream media started, taking note of what was going on, and they did. There were in America on, I'd say, about a week and a half after Russ Gibbs' broadcast. So it took about a week and a half. All the newspapers almost simultaneously came out with newspaper stories about Paul is dead. I mean, all over the entire country, and in England as well. I don't know about Australia.
Yeah.
I don't know about how far flung it was, but certainly in England and in America, simultaneously, all these newspapers, 300 or 400 newspapers had articles about it, and the network news in America came out with stories. Not just little, it wasn't just Walter Cronkite coming on and saying, there's a story today about Paul is dead. They had like put together packages, like 2-minute packages where they examine the clues and talk about it. and everything. They devoted a lot of time to it.
Yeah, articles in the New York Times, I think there was, and then with the Life magazine cover article is kind of the turning point where Paul is still with us. I remember coming across that issue at a market, like a flea market, and it was the
Hmm.
original, an original issue. I'm like, oh, I know exactly what this is about. I remember jumping on that, which I still have to this day, and
Right.
just the story about that. I think there was a photographer and a writer. We're one of many that were hitting the McCartneys on the Scottish property. You'll know the story better than I. Would you mind sharing just a little bit of that? Because that is kind of where the story largely puts water on it globally, doesn't it? Once that Life cover article is out.
You're right. And as I mentioned, or what we talked about before, is the fact that this was before computers. So when a rumor or any story came out, it spread very slowly and methodically. And if it was just complete nonsense, it was quashed pretty fast anyway, like any dumb rumor would be. But because there was some validity to this, the fact that Paul had not been seen around in public for a long time, because they had finished Abbey Road, and Paul had a sense that they weren't going to do any more albums. He had a sense that this was the end. And that's actually examined in the new documentary, Man on the Run. There's a new Paul McCartney documentary, and it sort of talks about the end of the Beatles and how rudderless and rootless he was at that point. He felt lost. And what he had done is he just pretty much went to a Scottish farm to sort of regroup and figure out what he was going to do next, because he figured the Beatles were over. So that the media took note of that. It's like, well, if Paul isn't dead, how come he won't talk to us? Where is he? And Derek Taylor, who is basically the press liaison, if you will, he told them, well, Paul's alive. He's all he has to do to prove he's alive is be alive. And they said, well, that's fine. You telling us that, but where is he? He's at his Scottish farm. Well, can we get a picture or something? No, he doesn't want to be bothered. He doesn't want to do interviews. So they were putting off the press, saying that basically you can't talk to him. And what is the press going to do? Come on.
Yeah.
What is the press going to do? You can't deny them their meat. They 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 want to talk to him, so they're going to talk to him. So what happened was, after all the speculation, and as the rumor kept growing and growing, and more people were joining in, and it was spreading over the world, basically, but certainly in the United States and England, it was huge. And what happened was people started thinking about, well, why don't we go to, if the mountain won't come to us, why don't we go to the mountain, right? So they started sending crews out to Paul's farm to bother him, and they sent, I think her name was Dorothy Bacon. It's in the book.
Yeah.
Dorothy Bacon was the correspondent, and then there were a couple of photographers, and they sent them out to get a quote from whatever Paul says. It doesn't matter. We just want to get a picture of him, and we want him to say something. And so they sent the crew out there, and Paul was really pissed off, and he was unshaven, and he was demoralized because he thought his band was over, and he didn't want to talk to anybody. Why are these people on his property? And so he saw them taking pictures of him, and he took this big bucket of water that he was using to water the animals. He's basically it was a working farm. He had goats and sheep and everything, and he picked up the bucket of water and he threw it on the whole crew of people and soaked them. And they said, "Oh boy, I guess we better get out of here." So they got into their Land Rover and took off, and drove away as fast as they could. And right behind them, Paul had jumped in his Land Rover to go over the boggy Scottish countryside to catch up with him. And he stopped him. And he says, "Wait, wait, wait, wait. I'm sorry what I did. I apologize for that temper tantrum. Why don't you come back and I'll give you an interview?" So Life magazine got the first interview with Paul McCartney since the whole rumor started. This was about maybe 2.5 weeks after the Russ Gibb So it took 2.5 weeks to get a statement from Paul.
Right.
And those photographs, they've never been seen because Paul basically charmed them. He says, "Hey, why don't you give me that film? I don't want you to use those pictures of me being mad." And he charmed them and invited them to the house, and he put on the Beatle charm, and then he got Linda to come out and take official photographs. And so Linda took all the photographs that you see. Well, most of them, not all of them, but
Yeah.
most of the photographs that are inside the magazine article were taken by Linda. And they're all
Right.
just showing the happy family on the farm. And he gave a statement. He says, probably, the rumor started because I haven't been out doing press very much. And basically, he didn't apologize, but he said, I just want to live in peace. And, the whole Beatles thing is over. He actually admitted that the Beatles were over. But most people didn't notice that in the article. They just, they noticed that he was alive.
Yeah.
And that was the whole point. And then of course, the picture on the front and the headline saying, Paul is still with us.
Yeah.
And it sold, I think 20 million copies of
Yeah.
Life magazine. There's a
Incredible.
lot of that. They're not really a rare collector's item. You can pretty much find them really easy. You can probably pick up a copy for $10.
Yeah, which I think I did many years later. There's something to be said for George's reflection in Anthology where he says they gave their screams and they gave their money, but we gave our nervous systems, which is sometimes a harder thing to give. And it's easy to take for granted the fact they even got through that whole experience as such young men with that constant pressure, that constant probing, while still trying to keep marriages together, keep a band together, be parents in some situations. And then go into the 70s, the very fact they got through it at all with their sanity largely intact. You could argue that John may have had his moments, but they largely got through that relatively untainted when you look at others that didn't quite make it through that decade.
Mhm. That's very true. I mean, it's stunning how much work they got done.
Yeah,
I mean, you look at bands today, they go, 10 years between records sometimes. Beatles were putting a record out every 9 months, basically. They put out 13 albums
yeah,
in the time they were not even together, but just the time period from 63 to 70,
yeah, it's
what
ridiculous.
8 or 9 year period. And they put out 13 albums.
And then they're giving you singles and B-sides and not replicating on albums. I mean, it's ridiculous that all of that happened as it did. Such an incredible story, and this book is clearly part of it. So let's just very quickly for our listeners, once again, am I correct? You're in edition 2 right now?
This is the third edition.
The third edition, and it is Turn Me On Dead Man, The Beatles, and The Paul is Dead Hoax. Where best should people secure a copy?
Well, of course, they can go on Amazon. I don't know about international Amazon. I know that in the US, Amazon features the book, but I prefer that you don't do that. I prefer you get it directly from my publisher, Genius Books.
Yeah.
Just type in Genius Books or just type in Turn Me On Dead Man in your search engine and Genius Books, and you'll get their website. They have a lot of great books. They
Yeah.
have a lot of music related books. They have another Beatles book about the Beatle who vanished. I don't know if you know that
Oh,
story.
Jimmy Nicol.
Jimmy Nicol, yeah, the guy who wrote that book. Um, Jim Birkenstock.
Yes, the rock and roll detective.
The rock and roll detective.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. He has a book there. It's not that one. It's not the Beatle who vanished. He self-published that book,
Yeah.
but he has another book, Mysteries of Music, and he investigates a lot of different mysteries of music, and that's available from Genius Books as well.
Ah, that's good to know. He's an
Book
incredibly
about
knowledgeable guy too.
Yes, and there's a whole bunch of great books there. So I recommend people go to the website and not only to pick up my book, but just to look around and see if there's anything else that strikes your fancy.
Yeah.
That's it. And
Well said.
I just would appreciate that because I like to help out the little guy. My publisher is a small publisher, and when you buy it through Amazon, he has to give Amazon a piece basically. But if you buy it directly from the publisher, then you basically give the money to him.
Yeah, no, that's terrific, and I'm glad you got that out. I might even look to drop a link to their site in the episode description as well, so people can get there quickly and easily. Andru, I want to thank you. This has been a terrific conversation about one of my favourite chapters in the Beatles story, and you've created an exhaustive work here that you've obviously stayed passionate about for some time that people would do well to seek out. What do you hope people take away from a book like this?
Just how important the Beatles are, their impact on us, not only musically, but as a culture, sort of everything. They influenced everything about us. They influenced our attitudes. They influenced our fashion. They influenced just our overall feelings of basically platonic love, not just romantic love, but platonic love, loving one another, caring about other people, and the fact that Paul is not dead. Paul is very much alive. I want to
Yeah.
make sure that people understand that I don't buy into the conspiracy. I only report. Don't shoot me. I'm only the piano player.
It's
As
been
Elton John said.
it's been terrific to speak with you, and thanks for taking us on a journey back through that terrific story. And best wishes for all future projects ahead.
Thank you, and same to you, Mike.
Thank you, Andru.
We hope you enjoyed the show. You know the name, look up the socials. You'll find us on Facebook and Instagram where we can all come together. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe and spread the word. It all helps raise the profile of the You Can Talk to Me podcast. Thanks for listening.